Before he joined Warhorse Studio, Daniel Vavra was part of 2K Czech. He was the brilliant mind behind Mafia and its sequel, Mafia II. Why Mafia and Mafia II in particular are incredible, awe-inspiring studies into the human condition, well, that's a topic for another video, or hell, maybe for another book. But Daniel Vavra is truly an auteur. And this is a collaborative medium we're talking about. The gaming industry has always been reliant on collaborative effort. But in the midst of this, Daniel Vavra stands out as an auteur. And like any other auteur, he finds himself under a lot of scrutiny now. And this auteur thing has its ups and downs. As a result, the ultra PC crowd seems to call for a boycott of his latest game, Kingdom Come Deliverance, simply because it bears his authorship, his signature. This is what Vice Media actually asks. Is it okay to separate the artist from his art? This is actually a pivotal moment in the history of video games. It will go down in the history of video games, ironically, with a video game that is actually historical, the first historical RPG ever made. But this is a pivotal moment in consecrating the medium, in elevating the medium as an art form. This is when the notion of the auteur starts to gain momentum in the industry. I just wish it all happened under better circumstances. Because right now we have Vice Media and a bunch of other ultra PC publications calling for a boycott of the game and asking the question, should we separate the artist from his art? And what has Daniel Vavra done to catch the ire of the critical establishment? Well, he allegedly supported Gamergate. That's his sin. And it doesn't matter that it has happened in the past. That carries on and casts a shadow of shame over his latest game. And collectively, everybody at Warhorse Studio bears the guilt of his alleged past transgressions. And as a feminist myself, I am not the type to take allegations of sexism or misogyny lightly, in the slightest. But with that said, Daniel Vavra is probably not the most diplomatic game developer out there. He definitely does not pander to the establishment. He never does even a modicum of effort to hide or conceal his controversial opinions. The guy is very blunt, but I seriously doubt that he is sexist or misogynist in any shape or form. Mafia II itself presents this issue in a very subtle way that does not seem out of place within the context of the patriarchal society of the early 50s, or within that world where bravado and toxic masculinity dominates, that violent world of the Italian mob. And Mafia 2 did present some social commentary in that regard. And it did it like all the other themes that it tackled. It did it in such a subtle, such a diplomatic, and such a contextually relevant manner that that game proved to me, once and for all, that video games are indeed a serious art form. I would argue that interactive possibilities have brought storytelling techniques to a whole new level, exclusive to the video game medium, unavailable to any other narrative-based art form before the advent of video games. But with that said, many video games nowadays still succumb to this flawed approach of pandering to a dying critical establishment from other mediums such as film to film critics who will never accept them as an art form to begin with. This has been the case so many times, but I understand it. It's the D.W. Griffith route to validation. It's pandering to an older demographic and speaking its language to seek validation and to consecrate the medium as an art form. I think it's a flawed approach, especially since the language of video games is like no other. Nonetheless, whilst many video games still succumb to that flawed approach, Mafia II resisted it. Mafia II presented its commentary and its realistic, de-romanticized depiction of mob life. It made use of game mechanics which otherwise would seem boring, where routine would lead to, player dissatisfaction. And they made those mechanics relevant to the story, inseparable from the story. But critics, of course, entirely missed the point of Mafia II. It was never meant to be compared or to see how well it stacks up against, other open world games. This was one of a kind. Mafia II was not an action game. It was a drama, a human, relatable human drama at the end of the day. The supporting characters, you were meant to sympathize with them, you were meant to feel for them, and if you do have a heart in you, and if you've played this game, you probably did. But critics missed the point entirely. They complained about repetition when repetition in that game served a clear point, and that point was to evoke the angst of existence and to shatter our playable protagonist's hopes. In doing so, the game manages to put itself up on a pedestal as one of the best character studies I have ever experienced in my life. By the end of that game, you see Vito as a broken individual, as somebody who has simply tried to make the best of a raw deal and is left with nothing. And I won't spoil it for you if you haven't played it, but I will just say that you don't just see him as your own avatar or, as a fictitious character. You genuinely feel for him. He leaves a lasting imprint as a result. But I digress. The point of that was to illustrate that Daniel Vavra not only speaks his mind openly, but he also puts his money where his mouth is in terms of craftsmanship. He does not pander to the critical establishment. He has a clear vision. He wants to challenge the status quo, and that's what he is doing with every entry to his gamography. But now he is accused of racism. And he is accused of racism for not including black people or people of color in his 100% historically accurate medieval RPG set in 15th century Bohemia. This game's main selling point is historical accuracy. And no, the vast majority of historians have concluded that had there been people of color, as the ultra PC establishment condescendingly calls them, had there been any such minorities in medieval Bohemia, they would have only been a handful, a tiny, tiny fraction, secluded only to specific areas, not relevant to where this game is placed. But by far the most enraging aspect of this whole controversy is the audacity highlighted by those people who dare call themselves progressives, this ultra PC crowd who dares speak for minorities they do not represent. These critics are entirely oblivious to the differences and cultural identities of different black populations. They lump in together a vast array of different black nations under one umbrella term, and they treat them as if they are this monolithic group for which they feel entitled to represent. Well, I had to burst your bubble there, but you are living in one delusionally racist bubble. Because if you are a white middle class douchebag making a living by wrecking other people's careers, you do not get to claim what you would call the black experience. You do not get to claim the rage and the feeling of being disenfranchised, or the frustration of being persecuted like other groups do, because they actually suffer persecution arguably on a daily basis. Furthermore, can you actually picture the nerve of taking on a minority's sense of anger upon yourself even before talking with any representatives of that minority? Can you actually imagine, assuming that black people will be enraged and put off by this game because there are no black or dark skinned NPCs? Are you fucking kidding me? There used to be a time when Eurocentrism was the norm. But in all fairness, I now believe that this attitude embodied by social justice warriors and by the far left is quite possibly a remnant of that mentality from colonial times. Lumping in together diverse groups of people based on skin color and treating them as one monolithic entity, that is racist. Having the audacity to speak for other groups even before consulting them, that is racist. Not seeing past skin color and a priori assuming that these groups will be put off by the game because there are no dark-skinned NPCs, that is a racist mentality. It is also condescending, insulting, and shameful. How dare you speak for black people? How dare you paint all of them with the same brush? How dare you? We are way past the point of tribalism, but that is exactly what you are doing. You are causing division and you are feeding into the hands of real racists. We do not need separation. We do not need division by skin color. We are way past that point. Vavra did not make a conscious effort to exclude black people from his game. That was never brought up because the issue of skin color is never brought up unless you're a racist. If you were to play a video game set in the Nubian Empire, which arguably started civilization, and inspired its Egyptian counterpart, would you expect any light-skinned characters in that video game? And it's not about double standard. I'm just making a point. Because I wouldn't have a problem identifying with any of the characters or feeling immersed. Because, one, I know that otherwise it would be historically inaccurate. And two, I am not a racist. I see past skin color. But if you're gonna play this tribalist card, let's take it up a notch. When you say you wanted black characters in the game, what exactly do you mean? Are you making any references to their ethnic background? Because if you're not, once more, you are treating them as this monolithic entity, which means you are signifying a vast and diverse group of people as the other. You are feeding into the hands of racists, and you are perpetuating a lingering, flawed mentality from the times of the colonial period.